think we should.
I'm Nick Harcourt, and welcome to the Record Parlor. We've got a fine array of amazing talent on stage, and they're all here for one guy, Jean-Michel Jarre.
Thank you very much.
So, I don't know where to start apart from the fact, oh my gosh, look at all these amazingly talented people on a stage in front of me. And they've all collaborated in the last couple of years with Jean-Michel. And we're going to talk about those collaborations. We're going to talk about the albums that came out of those collaborations. First of all, Electronica Volume 1, which is nominated for a Grammy this weekend. And that's really why we're all here tonight. You're obviously going to be back in the States later on this year touring, but you're up for a Grammy. And before we start talking about the various collaborations and involving everybody else, how does that feel at this moment in your career to be nominated for Best Electronic Dance Album?
As usual, before answering to your great question, I would like to make a comment before. You just started your speech by saying that we are all here for me. I would say that I'm here because of these guys and girls around. And without them, I won't be here. And I won't be here for not only because of this project, but the core and the original idea of this project is actually to gather around me people who are and have been and are a source of inspiration to me. And this is true for all of them, and also beyond all the other artists and great collaborators I've been chasing for 4 years. And they all said yes. I was very and honored. And I ended with a 2.5 hours project, and it's the reason why, a little bit like Kill Bill 1 and Kill Bill 2, I had to divide this project into volume. But there is no other reason than the time and the duration of each album. And I must say that the idea was really to gather people who are linked directly or indirectly to electronic music, who are, today electronic music has no boundaries anymore, and I think that among the people and the great artists around me tonight, and also the other ones in Electronica 1 and 2, it shows that probably electronic music has a legacy, has a family, and has a future. And I think this project is interesting beyond being my project because of this, showing that through time electronic music suddenly becomes and became not only a genre like rock and roll or hip hop or punk, but something which is a new way of approaching music in terms of composing and writing music, starting with sounds and not only with notes based on solfeggio.
I know that you and I have had a couple of conversations in the last year about exactly what you're talking about sound and electronic music just being another part of music. And I think that you said to me that America gave rock and roll to the world, and then Europe gave electronic music to the world. Can you expand on that a little bit?
No, I think actually rock and roll is born in the US and then invaded the world. And I think originally, electronic music is born in Europe, even if we had these discussions with Moby a few times, with Bell Telephone and lots of people. From the at quite an early stage of the 20th century, people were also working in the same kind of direction. But I would say that probably the influence of classical music, is probably a very important element to have for having, provided an whole bunch of people thinking not only in terms of American pop format, but this kind of long instrumental piece of music, not really linked to any kind of of pop or rock structure. And I mean by this that obviously continental Europe, started at a very early stage everything from the Luigi Russolo in the 1910 in Italy, with his manifesto, The Art of Noises, and from Leon Theremin in Russia in the late 20s. I mean, all this is coming from kind of continental Europe influence, but with this project, which is great, is actually people and great artists being involved in this project are coming from both sides of the pond, and because today it's everywhere, and we don't care after a while. And I just would like to add something. I mean, also something else beyond electronic music is we don't care if the instruments by the end of the day are acoustic or electric or electronic. Is the music is working or not? Is touching you, moving you or not? And also all these great artists, they have an instant recognizable sound. I remember the first time I went in at Moby studio. I mean, he just played a kind of simple D minor on his keyboard that any kind of a child of 5 years old child could play, and it was Moby, you know. And this is what we call style, and it's an instant recognized style. As we, it's true for Hans, it's true for Gary, it's true for Julia and for Victoria. It's the same thing. You listen a few seconds of what they do, and you know it's them and nobody else.
Well, let's bring the various artists on stage into this conversation. And Moby, I think you're a good place to start. You just mentioned the first time that you guys met. What was your first introduction to the music of Jean-Michel before you worked with him? How did you become aware of his music when you were younger?
Well, by the way, is there any water here?
Yes, very good idea.
And also D minor, as we learned a long time ago, it's the saddest of all chords.
Yes.
According to Spinal Tap. So I think when I was 13 or 14, I had a very cool friend who had grown up in England, and he had the best record collection of anyone I knew. And he had, thank you. And he had a copy of Oxygene, and I just remember it felt totemic to me. You know, like I was holding this record and I was looking at the artwork, and on one hand there was familiarity, meaning it was a record. You and I grew up with records, so I knew that this was a record, but there were no words, and it sounded like the future. You know, whereas most of the music I grew up with in the suburbs in Connecticut sounded like hippies. And it was one of the first things that I ever heard that made me realize that music could sound like science fiction and the future.
I was going to ask about science fiction, and we'll explore that across the conversation. But for you in particular, when you said the music sounded like the future, how did you connect the music to science fiction in your head?
Well, I mean, being a nerd who didn't have a lot of friends, I spent a lot of time watching and reading science fiction growing up. So I grew up with Space 1999 and Star Trek and etc. And you know, the closest I'd ever come to that was hearing, like I think I'd heard some Wendy Carlos music switched on Bach. But it was wonderful, but it was novelty. Whereas when I first heard Jean-Michel's music, it was emotional, but cold. It was cold and warm. It was like this interesting paradox. And it just didn't sound like the instrumentation was unique, the concept was unique, the emotions that it triggered in me were unique. And so it felt like opening this odd door into this sort of sonic future that I hadn't really believed could exist. Not to overstate it, but it's true.
So when you got the call, because I know Jean-Michel called everybody. He's a very smart guy. He's like, cut out the managers, just call the artist directly. You can get something done.
It's not smart. It's just the only way to do it.
Exactly. When you got the call, tell us about that.
Well, I mean, it is one of the oddest things about being a quasi-public figure musician is you get to meet and work with your heroes. But it was disconcerting, you know, because one of those moments where, like, if you had come to me when I was 14 years old and said, oh, by the way, in a few decades, this person that you revere will want to go to Real Food Daily with you and work on electronic music with you. There's no way I would have believed it. And then I got scared because the song, he sent me a rough working of a piece of music, and it intimidated me because it had a strange time signature and an odd like chord voicing. And so I just sort of, when I'm confused by things, I put them aside. So I put it aside for a while, hoping I would come back to it and it would make sense, and it didn't make sense. And then we had to sit down and he had to sort of explain to me this weird time signature, and it felt like I was listening to King Crimson circa 1973.
Perfect. Jean-Michel, why did you want to work with Moby?
Actually, Moby, what I always liked in music and in any kind of art form is this mixture of joy and melancholia. And Moby, not only for me, but that's actually a very good definition of Moby, is a kind of Woody Allen of techno. And I think that's...
Have you heard that one before? That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been following me around for the last few decades. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it's...
Technically, Woody Allen does have more hair than I do.
Not sure. And you know, this mixture of joy and melancholia, this kind of dark and sunny side, is actually Moby was mentioning that too on Oxygen, and I've always been almost obsessed by this kind of strange mixture. I think if you think of it, for all of us, what really moves you in any kind of piece of art, in a photography, in painting, in a movie, in a piece of music, it is kind of contrast, difficult to analyze, but moving you, what moves you is actually when something is actually not straightly happy or not sad, but a constant mixture of both. This kind of yes, depressive despair, but with hope and joy mixed all together. And I've always been like, I will obviously, if I invited Moby on this project, is for good reasons. But I think it was very high in my wish list for all these reasons. This whole way of I've been always interested in soundscapes. I mean, creating soundscapes, and I think every song of Moby is kind of soundscape in itself, and it's what always moves me. It's time. It has that kind of timeless touch, and also something which is very rare is this kind of constant. I would say go between the visual and the sound. I mean, I can see his music. And it's what really always impresses me, and forever. And there is a kind of, it's true for all these people around me, but there is a kind of timeless aspect to Moby's music.
Let me ask about Julia then. Julia, you have a track on Electronica 2 on the second volume, which is called These Creatures. Before you talk, maybe again I can come back to you as you talk about selecting the people you wanted to work with and the timelessness of what they've done with their own music. How did you hear about Julia?
I think I heard about Julia at a very early stage in her recordings when I was in LA, and I was working for the Muse, being Electronica. I mean, we had this. I remember that Moby, in a quite polite and ironic way, said, "You know, are you sure about this title Electronica? Because it's like it sounds really like a style of the 90s, a bit dated." And I said, "I don't give a fuck, because actually, for me, it's not that. Electronica is a kind of daughter of Electra, of the Muse, of light and energy, but in the 21st century." And I was looking for the Muse and this Electronica figure, and when I heard Julia, I heard instantly the voice and this kind of haunted and angelic type of mood that really instantly touched me, and I felt very, very instantly very intimate with her sound, with her music. it's a very strange mixture of folk, electronic, experimental. I mean, she reminded me about what I was doing when I was studying with Pierre Schaeffer at the Music Research Center, because she did some track with just recording sounds at the terrace of a cafe and just singing on that, and I was so impressed because it reminded me of the way I was considering music when I was 20 years old and rebelling about anything, about the establishment of classical music, establishment of rock, or obviously electroacoustic music was ideal for that. And I found all this in her music. This is the reason why I was really happy that Julia accepted to be part of the project.
So Julia, you get a call as well. I guess everybody got a call. You get the call. And did he bring something to the plate straight away? Did he bring a piece of music to you?
Yes. Yes, he just sat down and we listened on like an MP3 player or whatever. Did those exist anymore? Yeah. And yeah, just I was like, it was great. It was like the perfect thing to work on because it felt really like natural. Like the first time we met, I think, and you had brought a track, and it was this simple arpeggios and like kind of like repeating kind of somewhat like almost classical sequences, progressions. Very much sounded like your music, but it felt like something also that was spare enough that there was room for me to kind of like work with. And he also had an idea in mind, which was sort of like the alien versus human, or sort of this like different worlds connecting. And so it was like very easy for me to like work with those two, that kind of concept, and also this like harmonic material, and yeah, kind of pure tone, timbre, and yeah.
Had you been exposed to Jean-Michel's music prior to this?
Yes, but I think not quite. It was more like a lot of my friends would always talk about music, and I like fully dove in at that moment, and it was like very exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I just would like to add that actually she went back with. I did this track at the Chateau Marmont in the hotel room, and she came back at the hotel, and the following week she came back with the kind of track. It was more or less done, and I had nothing to add. It was very, very quite magical. The whole experience with Julia was very magical, like the track is. And I would say that I had two principles for this project. Is actually to meet with people and working with all of them in their studio, in their environment, meeting them in their environment or in mine. In days where so many people are sending files to people they would never talk to or they would never meet with, I think it was very important to get this. As electronic musicians, we are quite isolated in our studios. We're not like rock artists or jazz men. People playing together, and it's like the work of a writer, of a painter, and we are quite isolated. And I was really touched by the fact that all of them, opened their doors. This is like a secret garden. You have all your weak points. You have all your, and to give this to somebody else is something very rare and very unusual. And the second principle was also to come with an idea, with the idea coming from the fantasy or the phantasm I had regarding the other artist, which was not necessarily the truth, but it was my truth, my feeling about them. It was not necessarily what they thought they would be, but it was really those two principles I tried to keep for in every case.
I mentioned at the beginning that Electronica 1 is up for a Grammy this weekend, but Electronica 2 is also up for, and I'm going to screw up the pronunciation, I'm sure, the Victoire de la Musique, which is the French
Grammy, yes,
award this weekend, I think.
Yes, at the same time.
Tomorrow night.
Yeah.
So it could be a great weekend for you. Let's hope so.
It's already a great weekend because being nominated is anyway as we know, a great achievement. I mean, taking anything back is something that I would like to divide in 30, because all of them deserve a part of it if it happens.
Now, Hans Zimmer, you have a track that ended up on Electronica 2 as well, and I do want to talk to you a little bit. I'll have to remind myself to come back about how you divided the tracks on the 2 albums. But Hans, you grew up in Europe and spent some time in England as well as a young guy in that music scene. I'm presuming that you were very well aware of Jean-Michel Jarre's music when you were a teenager. Can you tell us about your first exposure?
Of course, my first exposure was Oxygen, and of course, being German, I was already into electronic music. I was into Can and Tangerine Dream and Kraftwerk. I can actually pronounce it. Kraftwerk. Okay, it had to be done. But let me just, because listening to all of you, I just want to add something to what Moby was saying, and actually something Jean-Michel and I were talking about. Science fiction. If you think about science fiction movies, the music and the movies are inherently nostalgic, which seems like a complete contradiction in terms. And the first time Jean-Michel and I met was actually, G.Numan was there, and the 3 of us, actually, I just, after a while, just stopped. I just listened to the 2 of them talking about this development of electronic music, and it was interesting having a guitarist in the room who, again, didn't want to play the blues because the blues was already taken by the Rolling Stones, etc. And this history of European classical music, our harmony was different, our sense was different, and somehow this sense of nostalgia, I think, very much even though we're constantly striving to. I mean, look, the first time I heard Cars, it was like a shock to the system. It was, I'd never heard the idea of harmony used in that way, but it was completely different. So this idea of searching forward all the time somehow is rooted in some terrible romanticism that we all seem to have like a virus in us, so. What were you asking me? Oh, but first time I heard about look, I fell in love with this man the first time I heard Oxygen, and I wore the record out, and then I got another copy of it, and then luckily he released another album, and I fell in love with the music and the thing that he was doing, which was to deny all those naysayers who were saying electronica was cold by showing everybody that there was an emotion, not sentimentality, but true emotion in electronics.
And to a certain extent, you guys had trodden some of the same paths, some of the same ground before you ended up collaborating. You mentioned classical music. You started playing.
Yeah, I had 2 weeks of piano lessons. I'm really educated.
As a piano player, though.
No, I didn't. I started out as a punk guitarist.
All right. Everybody on the stage started as a punk guitarist. We got to get the cred in first.
No, it's not cred. It's inability.
But piano, classical music. I mean, you're known for fusing electronic music with orchestral music.
Yeah, but it really comes from an ignorance in a way, because this is the truth. I did have 2 weeks of piano lessons, and that is my formal education. But I was listening to electronic music, and as you said earlier, it doesn't matter what the instrument is. I mean, if you think about, okay, let's just be truly honest here. If you think about the Dark Knight movies I did with Chris Nolan, all I did was I made the orchestra play sequencer parts. I mean, so much so that we would make these. I would make these electronic textures, and I would play them to the orchestra, and I would say, okay, now synthesis always had that terrible stigma attached to it that it was copying acoustic instruments, which is, of course, complete bullshit. So let's turn it around. Acoustic instruments, cellos, how would you go and make the sound? And we would have these sessions where I would try to get the acoustic instruments to imitate these electronic landscapes.
So by the time you guys got together to work on a track, how did that come about? Again, I'm presuming that you made a call and you had a piece in mind?
Yes, I went to visit Hans in his studio with a piece in mind, and I played the demo. I played to him, and for me, Hans Zimmer is very important in this project because he's the man who introduced electronic music in Hollywood, and as he said, not only by using electronic synthesizers, but also by using, as he said, and people are not talking about this enough in his work, about the electronic music approach with an orchestra, with violins, with cellos, with really having this kind of electronic musician approach for the symphonic orchestra, and obviously that was for me something very important, and also we have a special relationship in my family with soundtrack because of my father, and in a very strange way, Hans is a link with not a missing father, but maybe a missing brother, and he's much older than me, but I can say, but actually we look like brothers, right? Okay. And yes, and for me, it's a matter of instant recognizable sound. I mean, you listen to Rain Man from Dark Knight or The Dark Knight. I mean, I love also this kind of bigger than life. I mean, he doesn't hesitate to use 48 double basses if he needs it, and that's really great. And it changed really the approach of the symphonic orchestra, because no one except him on tour would have 48 double basses. Maybe not that much, but almost.
She's 32, so that's not exactly.
Yes, only 32. You're big on collaborating, though, as well, aren't you? It's a big part of your history.
Yeah, because what you said is so true, that I spent a lot of years very much alone in a dark room being an electronic musician, and I suddenly figured this crazy thing out. You can get other people in, and there's something that I think people miss about musicians. It's not even how we play that is important, it's how we listen. And we are really good at listening to each other. And so, for instance, if it's Jean-Michel and G.Numan and I in the room, there's the only way we can make each other better is you bring me a track and I listen to it, and I listen to your words and I listen to your music, and that is what makes the track move forward. And I don't know. I mean, you said before this interview started, let's start a band. I'm saying you're in, because the collaboration is partly verbal, and then we run out of words, and then we have to start playing, and that's what we musicians do.
Yeah, I regretted to not having done that 10 or 15 years ago. Maybe I was not ready, but it has been like an initiation journey for me, really. I mean, not only on a musical point of view, but also on a human point of view.
Gary, let's bring you in. You have a track called Here For You, which is on Electronica 2. And I know you started off playing guitar in punk bands.
We almost started. I started also as a punk like him.
Yeah.
My first band was called the Dustbins. It was very cool in France. Having a band.
Hans,
called
what was the name of your first
Paris.
band? Hans?
Must we do this?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I did it. So.
Will you make it in the 10 take 5s?
Mine was the Vatican Commandos.
Very good.
Brilliant.
Gary, your first band?
Gary, what was your first band?
My first punk band was called The Lasers.
Oh, you were way ahead of us. You were cool.
Bad ones. I was in one called Lotus Circle, which was like a prog band that I thought was pretty cool.
I want to talk.
Julia? No punk.
I guess I haven't actually been in a band. Wait.
Well, you're in one now.
Yeah. Okay. I've played in people's bands.
I think, I want to give kudos to Gary Numan as well here, because, we're talking about pioneers in electronic music, and we've got another one right here on the stage with us. I think, yeah. So you started off with punk bands, and your early recordings were punk-influenced recordings. When did synthesizers enter your world?
It was an accident, actually. I'd been to, I'd heard Oxygen, and so I'd already realised that there was another way of making music compared to guitars, but it hadn't really bitten me. And so I was still chunking away with the guitar, and I went to a studio to record what should have been my first punk album. And there was a synthesizer in the corner, a thing called a Mini Moog, a little small portable thing. And I'd never seen one before, and I mean, I'm quite geeky for buttons and switches and that. And I asked if I could have a go of it. I mean, I couldn't play keyboards, still can't really. Couldn't play keyboards very much. And so they just let me do it. And so I had no idea. There's things said, contour and emphasis. I had no idea what that meant. So I just twiddled.
See what happened.
Yeah, and it made some. I was very lucky, actually. I mean, the sound that had been left on, whoever had it before, changed my life, really. Because honest to God, honestly, it was brilliant. And I pressed this key. Bearing in mind, I've been spending all my time trying to make a guitar sound more powerful, because it's all about power to me, no finesse whatsoever. And I pressed one key on this keyboard, and the whole room shook. Jesus Christ, that's for me. Yes.
Right.
And I was just sold on it immediately, and a few more aimlessly twiddling around with these things, and it made all kinds of other noises as well, and it was just so liberating. And I'm so much more interested in sound than I am in anything else. Certainly in technique. I have no technique whatsoever, but I love noises, and I don't care where they come from. I'm born from synthesizers, I guess, in that sense, and it was a Mini Moog that I first stumbled across. And I changed all those songs while we were there. It was there for 2 or 3 days. And everything that was written on the guitar, going na 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 na, now went and that was it. And I went back to the record company with that. Sounded like that.
Somebody sample that right now, yeah.
Pretty much my first album, that. And they hated it. It wasn't what they wanted at all. So we had a big argument. But I already thought, this sounds silly now because Jean-Michel had already done it, but I had this feeling that there was something happening, something coming, and I wanted to be a part of it. I didn't want to be the main part of it, I just wanted to be a part of it. And I thought electronic music was going to change everything, and I'd forgotten that he'd already done it. He really had.
I was going to ask you if you were aware of Jean-Michel. Obviously, you just mentioned, but were you aware of the other stuff that was coming out of Germany? Bands like Can and bands like Tangerine Dream and Kraftwerk.
Yeah. There was an album called Tego Mega, I think, that Can did, that my cousin Richie used to make me listen to. But I did like it. I didn't like it from a melody point of view because there wasn't a great deal of it.
I don't think there was one.
I don't think there, not one. But the sound of it, the noises coming out of it were phenomenal, and that had a big effect on me. Which is why I'm embarrassed that I never went into it because of those things. I went into it because I stumbled across it, and it reminded me, I guess, all these things that I'd heard when I was younger, what Jean-Michel had done, what Can had done, and Tangerine Dream and so on. And it was that point when it was actually in front of me and you could play it, it all suddenly came together and made sense, and it absolutely changed the way I thought about music. It certainly changed the way that I wrote music. I think as an electronic musician, you write from a very, very different angle. I don't know quite how to put it really, but it's just a different approach to music. When you approach music sound first, it leads you in a different direction to what I think other musicians would do or other songwriters would do.
I'm trying to bring everybody into this conversation, and we'll just sort of have a free-for-all and see where it goes. And we're going to get to L.Boots in just a moment. But just to finish up on your collaboration, again, I'm intrigued to know why you picked these people. And obviously there's 32 across the albums. Gary, I'm sure you're aware of the hits that he had, but what was it about him as a songwriter, as an artist, as a vocalist that made you want to work with him?
You know, we're all talking about the link and the huge link between electronic music and science fiction. And probably for me, Gary is the perfect example of not only a musician, but a character coming from science fiction. Like he's like a character escaped from a Philip K. Dick novel or a replicant from Blade Runner. You know, it's not only his sound, it's not only his music, it's also the way he's performing on stage. I mean, all that was, for me, it's as important as David Bowie for rock, Gary is for electronic music. It's something which is absolutely a unique sound, and also this kind of approach, again, of the fact of constant go-between experimentation and melodies. We all hear thinking, and we're not thinking. If you listen to our music, we're all putting the melody at the center of our music. And Gary is experimenting like all of us, but in his own style, and creating this kind of instant kind of strange sci-fi world. It's not only what he sings, it's the way he sings, it's the way his voice he's using his voice like as an instrument. And I would say that actually almost all the people, vocalists involved in this project, like Moby or Victoria or Julia or Gary and lots of others, I think they're not only singers when they sing, they're always using their vocals as part of the music arrangement. And which is absolutely unique in Gary's, again, this constant go-between extreme melancholia and with a bit of hope, you could say. Huh?
Victoria, a.k.a. L.Boots, first of all, welcome to Los Angeles. I know you just moved here.
Thank you.
You spent some time here, I know, over the years, but you're actually a resident now.
I've moved to Echo Park for now, but I've been here 1 week, so... 1 week, so yeah, hi. Anyone wants to go for coffee, give me a shout.
We were talking before, and she was asking, so what's your advice for somebody moving to LA? I was like, don't trust anybody.
I was like, it's fine, I'm from London. I mean, that's number one rule.
Well, welcome back, because I know you spent a lot of time here over the years. And interestingly enough, you started off in an indie band. Your first time around, I guess, your first time out as a songwriter was part of a band. You're also known as a DJ. So how did you move from being part of an indie band into playing the music that you play now and becoming a DJ?
I think like my indie kind of sensibilities have run through all of it, so it's not actually that much different. But like the reason I started playing synthesizers was to get in a band, because I played piano since I was young, and I was like, all the cool kids are in a band, I'm never going to get in a band with a piano, you can't take that to a gig. So I was like, what's this synth thing? Maybe I'll like give one a go. Saved up all my pocket money to get I think it was a Korg MS-2000, which is not very cool, but the whole thing was driven to kind of get in a band. And then once I stopped being in a band, I was like, well, this is all I've got left is my keyboard, so I'll just carry on. And that's how I ended up having such an electronic sound, I guess, for my own music. And then I suppose the thing about, I'd always been aware of Jean-Michel's music, but the thing that really got me in a black hole was watching YouTube videos, mainly of laser harp. And I got so obsessed that I spent hours trying to build one from an online tutorial with a Nintendo Wii remote, because I obviously couldn't afford a real one. And this was like a real dark hole, like hours went onto this project.
It's commitment, right?
I know. And eventually we made the most ghetto laser harp ever, but it did just about work, apart from when we played at Coachella and then it decided to break, so good one. But it's that whole, I think one thing we really bonded about when we met was how you can visually represent electronic music, and that's always been something that's really central to what I do. How can you make a live show for electronic music not just be some dude stood behind a laptop, and really there's just so much scope, I think, in that world, and it's so exciting. And some of the things Jean-Michel does just push the boundaries of that so much. It's like, so yeah, we just had a big nerd out about that stuff.
So once you got together, again, I'm presuming that Jean-Michel brought something to you to start off with. Tell us about the process, what he brought into you, and then the time that you guys spent working it out. Because I know that the whole project took more than 4 years. So what was your collaboration like, and the amount of time it took you guys to do it?
I mean, we met in London, we met in Los Angeles. There was a lot of back and forwarding, and the track changed quite a lot actually, because the original track was really frantic, and Jean-Michel had suggested these lyric themes about kind of communication and technology and interaction, and this track was like ADD, you know, it was 100 miles an hour, and it really made me feel this kind of anxiety that you get off online of everybody constantly saying stuff, but what is everyone even saying? It's a load of noise, it's a load of crap, really. And the lack of connection. I mean, similar to what you were saying about, you know, so much music these days is made just on emails, and people don't just pick up the phone or go in the studio, and that's what's really made a difference to this project. So yeah, I took those lyric themes and really ran with it. So the song is about, you know, one of the lyrics is busy saying nothing, and it's that whole kind of reward but also anxiety from online and from lack of human connection, I guess. But then the song changed tempo about 3 times, I think. And so I kept redoing the vocals at different speeds, and eventually it found its place, I guess.
So in this process of 4 years, and we've only got 5 people on stage here, there's another 26, I think, who you met with and spent time with. What did you get out of this project?
Actually, I would like to make a quick comment about our encounter and what the reason why I wanted to work with L.Boots, because I actually have been aware of her actually by discovering a kind of mini-me playing the laser harp. I said it's quite strange, it's quite interesting, and then I went into her music, and I've been really impressed by the way she was experimenting in I saw some movies, some little movie where you were recording in your kitchen, something with a tenori on, with the Yamaha things, and I said, it's great. She's a real nerd, but she doesn't look like a nerd. But she's a real nerd. And then I've been absolutely blown away by her first album, and I said it could be really interesting. And I had this idea of kind of frantic track, and she's been very courageous because it was really fast, and I think. When I heard what she did, I said it should be halftime, and then we did it. We did it again, and I must say that I really love this track, and she brings something very very special to it, and you know, she mainly sang, adding some sounds, but actually even in the way she sings, you feel that she's an electronic musician.
So back to the question. Thank you for finishing that off, but. After 4 years of meeting with everybody and spending time in different people's studios, what did you come away from this process?
Obviously, I learned a lot. It's been really a learning process. I mean, being able to share sometimes with some people, like in Gary's studio, and listening to the same piece of music just side by side, and trying to develop an idea. Like the same thing with in Hans' studio or in Moby studio, and the same for everybody. It has been for me a kind of actually unique experience. I would like to say that for any young artist, I really encourage them to do it, because in these days in home studios we think that we are controlling the world and we are in contact with the world through our laptop, and we are probably. It's probably sending us, as we know, to a different kind of solitude. And artistically, I think one of a good friend of mine, a music critic in London, said, I mean, you probably created a new concept, which is the never-ending album. Because of course, I'd like to continue, and I'd like also to work more with the same people, because also through this kind of experience. Beyond words, I mean, you save time for building a true friendship, It's what I felt with everybody. I mean, sometimes it takes time to create a friendship with people just by talking. And I consider that probably talking the less sophisticated way of communication, and the fact of sharing a creative process is something so deeper in terms of how to connect to each other, that it's something that, I mean, it's an absolutely unique experience and very rich experience for me.
It's interesting that the takeaway from this is the humanity within making the music, because somehow we've talked about at the beginning of this how electronic music can be considered cold, but your takeaway from this really seems to be about what you got as a human from the collaborations.
But again, it's not the music which is electronic, it's the instruments we are using, and the feeling we can have by listening to a music we like or the music we do is just coming from the guy behind the machine so far. With artificial intelligence, it may change, but so far it's the case. And I think that I always considered electronic music, and I'm sure that my friends here would share the same feeling. Actually, I learned electronic music with Pierre Schaeffer. It's called the father of musique concrète. And musique concrète is born more or less at the same time as abstract painting. And I always thought that it was crazy to call abstract painting, to call, for instance, Jackson Pollock's work as abstract. For me, it's like peinture concrète. It's like because it's actually like a cooking. I'm from Lyon. We like to consider us as the center of the world for cooking, and I think that electronic music is like cooking frequencies, loops, beats, textures, waveforms in a very organic, sensual way, almost sexual way. It's a very active. It's something which is absolutely not cold. I think it's probably more cold or more cerebral to write some notes on a piece of paper with a pencil and waiting that an orchestra would play our music. We should never forget that in Mozart's time you had people who wrote some music and composed their music all their lives, and they never heard their music because they never found a publisher able to invest in doing the scores and renting an orchestra. So it's an immense and it's a huge privilege to be able, from our home, to be able to write music, to produce, and even to distribute your own music these days.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, because it is I don't know, it seems to change almost every day. The paradigm of the music business, the music industry has just changed so significantly since you started this project. When you say that people now have the opportunity to create something, make it, and distribute it to the world themselves, what's the bigger picture on that with people connecting, when anybody can actually make music and put it out there and get it out? Of course, people still have to find it, but people now have the opportunity. The distribution is now in the hands of the artist. Can you expand on that and your thoughts on that?
Yes, and I will be happy to share the microphone to my friends here. But very briefly, for my opinion, is actually music has never been so distributed. It's everywhere, and it's a big advantage to be able to be anywhere on the planet with just a laptop and being able to do some music. At the same time, as we know, technology has also a darker side, and that you have these kind of giants on the internet. Making billions of cultural content. And lots of authors have just the amount of money to pay a pizza without pepperoni by the end of the year. And this is something which not for us, but for future generation. We have to create a decent business model for creators, not only for musicians, but we should never forget that in a smartphone, the smart part is us, and or mainly us. And I think it's very important to send a clear message, because it's not a niche for artists or for musicians. It's actually in every family you have a child dreaming becoming a photographer, writer, musician, a filmmaker, and he will probably abandon his dream. He will have to get a job on the side, and probably he will not do it. And I think this is something that we should really think about. It's as important as when I started Oxygen. I was really involved in ecology. I'm still is, and we were considered as dreamers and neo hippies. I think it's the same thing for intellectual property. It's not a matter of being sat on a pot of gold for artists in the West, but it's just really to try to recognize the value of art. I mean, it's what makes us as we know, and it's not a cliche. It's what makes us feeling a sense of community. I mean, as a French guy, I'm deeply European, but I think Europe is a big failure in terms of politics. But what makes us being European is because you can be in Germany, in Sweden, in Portugal, in Spain, in Paris, in London. We feel that we are part of the same place, the same in the US.
Let's get everybody to kick in on this, maybe Hans, and then we're going to see if we can get a question or two.
No, I was thinking that listening to all of you guys, me saying, "Oh, I had 2 weeks of piano lessons," the paradigm actually shifted because Gary, all of us, what we got really good at is twiddling knobs, which is just as we learned how to play electronics, and we invested as much time learning our instruments. It's just a different paradigm. It's not the piano anymore, or it's not about being really good on your violin. A friend of mine, Steve Lipson, who's a great record producer, actually the other day I overheard him say, "Oh, I worked with so many geniuses. They all have one thing in common. They roll up their sleeves and they do hard work." And I think it's just, there is still this sort of idea that because, and we were joking about it, because we're not a virtuoso cellist or something like this, but we are virtuosos at my instrument. I mean, what was it you started with, the Korg? It was 2000, but you got good at it. Do you know what I mean? You loved that thing. I had a VCS3. You probably had a VCS3 too, which was, and Gary will appreciate that, because I was living in a flat in Brighton where you had to put 5p into the meter to get electricity.
Yeah.
And you try to be an electronic musician when the meter runs out and you're sitting in the dark and you don't have any 5p's left. But the thing you are referring to, the dream, the hunger to go and make music, the hunger of creating something, and that is the great thing, and it's the problem. Because of course, everybody's downloading our stuff, and it's harder and harder to make a living at music in a funny way, because everybody thinks it's a commodity. I mean, it's like, one of the things I try to do, I'm very aware of, is, for instance, orchestral music is having a bit of a hard time because it's a bit of an expensive hobby to keep it, to have an orchestra around. So all the negative things, the horrible things you can say about Hollywood are 100% true, but it's the last place on earth that on virtually an hourly basis commissions orchestral music, and so because if the orchestra dies, it's not just that these musicians will be out of work, but we will have lost some link to our humanity, and it'll be terrible. And none of us have ever been those guys that were replacing, all those things. No, what we've been doing is we've been adding to the vocabulary, we've been adding to the instrumentation.
Gary, let me bring you in. First of all, my only memory of the 5 pences in the meters was if I didn't have them, I was going to be cold that night.
Oh, well, that goes without saying.
The power's gone. That's it until you got a 5 pence piece, and you probably grew up in a flat or two like that as well. What's your take on the general stuff that we're talking about? You started off as a guy who played guitar, organic instruments, and we're talking, I guess, about how it's all a tool to make music. Where do you sit with that today when you look at your place in making music today?
Well, first of all, the thing about electronic music being cold is something that I've always really kicked back against. The thing that any musician will express themselves emotionally or otherwise through the notes that they play, mostly. You have a guitar or a piano or any instrument like that, and you will express yourself with the sound that it gives you, primarily. With electronic music, you can do all of that, but you can create the very sound itself that people listen to. So you have an entire extra level of emotional content in what you're doing compared to other music that people consider warm. I think electronic music is the most human, the warmest of all the genres that there are out there, for that very reason. There's not much you can do with the guitar, so plug it into a few pedals and make it sound a bit different, but it doesn't sound that much different, really. But with electronic music, you can create almost anything. I'm not a great fan of all that sort of stuff. These amazing guitar solos that I'll never be able to do, but very clever. But I don't like it because quite often all you need is one note. Just hit the note and let the sound change, and the sound will carry you through the emotion you're trying to do. And it can be perfect, and it's just a different way of going about it. And for me, that's probably why my stuff is so simple, because I can't do all that clever stuff, but I don't need to, because I have other things in there. The palette, if you like, of what's at your disposal with electronic music is much broader in terms of sound and what you can create with it than conventional instrumentation. But I came into it as part of a band, as a guitar player in the band. So I think I very luckily, by accident, stumbled across a mix. I wasn't someone that sat in a dark room on my own. I was in a band, and I was going out doing punk gigs and getting spat on and all that shit that used to go on a lot. But I was part of something. So when I discovered electronic music, I added it to the band environment that I had before, and I think that's why I made it. Not because the songs are particularly good, but it straddled that fence between what was considered experimental and therefore a bit cool and different, but what was still relatively conventional and so was acceptable. Because I still had guitar, bass, drums, I just had all this other stuff as well. And what I learned from Jean-Michel, many things, one of the things was how to present electronic music, how to make sure that people were interested when they were seeing it. When you got that magic moment, you finally got your shot at television, and it might be the only one you got ever. You had to make sure that people, and you had an instrument that wasn't particularly visual, how are you going to do it? How are you going to make sure people look at you rather than somebody else? And so lighting started to play a part in it, and the image, the whole way you presented it, the way you looked, did you smile, did you not, this whole thing. And I used to study his light shows and things like that, and just learned an enormous amount about presentation, how electronic music could be made to look interesting as well as sound interesting.
I think life is all about the lights, really. Just however you do it, the lights in your house, the lights at a show, the lights are the difference. They really are. You can create
in this room.
Yeah, actually. When the lights go down, it feels a little bit different. I'm going to throw it out to a couple of questions in one moment, but I want to bring Moby back in because it seems ages ago that I started off by talking to you, and I want to ask you one more question along the lines of what Gary was just saying, really, which is you started off by, you and I have spoken a few times, and you started off by listening to Joy Division and The Cure, and then you found your way to Black Flag and punk music, and then electronic music, and you've seen the whole thing sort of go full circle a couple of times as a DJ, and then as an electronic musician, and then as a guy out there with a band, and now you're DJing, I think, and also playing out again with your new project. Where do we sit today with all these tools that are available to us as musicians?
Well, it's funny. I do have a dirty secret. When we all said that we started out in punk rock bands, I sort of did. The truth is, before I was in a punk rock band, I studied music theory and classical music. Sorry.
All right, it's out. It's out there.
And then, so I was a guitar player, and sadly, I was the guy going whittly, whittly, whittly. And I was never very good at it. And then I discovered two things. I discovered punk rock, which made me realize, like, oh, simple music can be more emotionally impactful than complicated music. And then I discovered electronic music, and I realized that there was a palette of sounds that a band could never make. And then the third utility that I discovered was, by being an electronic musician, you didn't have to wait for other people to show up. Because the bands I was in, the drummer would be drunk, the bass player would be on acid, wandering around in his underpants, the whatever, and you're just like, come on, just get your fucking act together. And then I discovered drum machines and synthesizers, like, oh, I don't need people anymore. And as someone with attachment disorders, that really appealed to me. But what's interesting, because there was this stigma around electronic music for the longest time. Like, I mean, do you remember, like, these arguments in Cream magazine, like, electronic synthesizers aren't real music, drum machines are terrible. Those debates are so long gone because everything is electronic music. Like, it's safe to say that 99% of the music produced now is electronic music, in that it's produced electronically. Like, even when Metallica go to make a record, they're using Pro Tools, they're augmenting everything with sequencers, they're like, it's really hard to find a record that isn't some aspect of electronic music in terms of, like, the recording or the composition or the production. So, like, we won. Like, kudos to us. Like, decades ago when people were like, electronic music, like, ugh, go make real music. I was like, well, I did make real music and it was boring, and I chose electronic music because it was more emotionally impactful and more interesting and more limitless than what I could do with the guitar.
Those arguments are long gone, and especially as we've sort of moved through the last 10 or 15 years, I think, with how music, the making of music, the distribution of music has changed, and even the performing of music, where somebody can literally go out now with a laptop and go perform, or maybe with a laptop and a drummer and go perform. And before I throw it out, I'm going to do it in just 1 minute. I remember talking to the guys from Air, who were on one of your collaborations on the first volume, and them talking to me and saying that they saw themselves as I wish I could do the accent, I can't, but as 21st century hippies, because they take a laptop, they get on a plane, and they go wherever they want to perform, and it's just such a different way of looking at the performing of music. Anyway, that's me just sort of trying to wrap that up to some point where I can get a couple of questions. I do need to ask how much time we have before we have to jump out of here, because I don't think it's a lot. 5 minutes. So we've got, the first hand I saw was right there. So shout it out loud and direct it to whoever you would like to ask the question to.
Yell. This is for Jean-Michel. So I look across the stage here, and I never thought I'd even see Moby and Monster or anything. So I just want to ask, like, you obviously have this diverse taste and a lot of friends that make really different music. Just going through your catalog on Spotify, I noticed music with voice noise, Army Memory, people I've seen at like giant raves, and so I just want to know, like, where do you get this complete openness in music where you can work with L.Boots, J.Numan,
I think that we, very simply, each of us, I hope, are not just monomaniac. Then we love sometimes listening to jazz, to classical music, to heavy metal, to prog rock, to electronic music. It depends on the mood. And I think electronic music is far beyond than a genre, because it's another way, as Moby said it, another way of approaching music composition. And what we have in common, and what I wanted to share, is this kind of cooking approach of music by sharing the kitchen.
Next hand is right here. Shout it out as loud as you can, though, please.
Oh, sure. So I've got a big record collection, big music collection. About a third of it is G.Numan. The rest of it, though, all of my 80s and 90s stuff are records, and my 2000s and such are CDs. Now I'm being asked to choose between records and CDs as new albums come out. I'm wondering how you guys listen to your music.
Oh, does anybody want to pick that up? Maybe Julia, let me pull you
Can
back
I
in.
just very quickly say, when I moved into my new house, I dusted off my record player, and I'm having this newfound love for records. And what I've been forcing myself to do is listening to records and not doing anything else. Like putting on Goat's Head Soup and sitting down and listening. And not texting and not, like, it reminds me of like how I used to listen to music when I was growing up. Not in the background, not as the soundtrack to something else, but just like immersing myself in the record. And I don't even have a CD player. So for me, it's either like Spotify or vinyl.
Julia, how do you listen to music today?
CDs still, and iTunes, and so MP3s, and occasionally records now, I guess. I'm starting to.
It's staggering to me that vinyl is now $1 billion a year business again. It's quite amazing. Anybody else want to jump in on this?
Well, I'm weird because my life.
We know. We know.
Okay. You mean don't state the obvious? Right. No, because my life is surround. I mean, I constantly work in 5.1. So to listen to a CD is actually rather disappointing because you took most of my world away. And here's the weird thing. If you put on vinyl, and so this is where the weird part comes in, something happens. It feels more real. There's something, and yes, everybody's done the tests, and you can look up all the science, and you can look at all the figures. You put on a record, and maybe it's part of the ritual of putting on the record that makes the difference. But there's a commitment, and I like listening to records, but I hate listening to CDs, and I hate listening to stereo if it's not vinyl.
I do want to also say that you're fabulous as well as weird. You are.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Fabulous and weird works.
I think the test for me is if you have a party and put a Spotify playlist on random, then you have a party and you all pick out the records and put them on. It's a completely different party, and the vinyl party is better every time.
So there's almost there's a sort of like an evolutionary aspect to this. I was just researching, there was a study done where mothers, and I don't know if this is esoteric or relevant or not, but mothers and newborns were put in separate rooms and connected by video camera and monitor. And when it was real time, the babies were happy. And then they introduced a delay of less than 1,000th of a second, and the baby started crying because they knew something was off. And I would posit that the difference between the most highest bit rate digital and the analog wave of vinyl, like a bit rate, we always know that there's steps in there.
Absolutely.
That's why I think when people talk about the warmth of vinyl, I think it's an actual, like, we're so accustomed because we're looking for emotional connection. So there's just something, at least for me, that's more authentic about it.
We have time for one more question, and the first hand I saw go up was right there.
This is for Jean-Michel and H.Zimmer. I was wondering, what do you think is the role of movies in the acceptance of electronic music? Because 2 weeks ago I watched Witness that your father composed, and it was like a revolution in the 80s. So what's the role of movies helping in that acceptance?
Okay, Hans is obviously the specialist for answering to his question, but just one quick comment because we are running out of time. And I think that electronic music and movies have a very difficult relationship because actually it's strange to see that how many sci-fi movies that would think that it would be ideal to have a complete synthesizers type of arrangement actually, and are actually using and the producers they want to use a symphonic orchestra. So Hans find the trick. He's approaching the symphonic orchestra like a synthesizer, but otherwise it's very difficult. And I think that there is this kind of relationship with electronic music and visual. That's what makes electronic music very close to movies. Is actually we are writing with electronic music probably soundtracks of the story you can create in your mind. And this is why I think electronic music is soundtrack in itself.
Hans, you want to jump on this very quickly?
Yeah. Actually, very quickly, I think it depends entirely on the courage of the director. You know, for instance, working with Chris Nolan means that I have great artistic autonomy, because that's what he gives me, to do this, to use an orchestra or electronics or whatever. Sometimes I get confused what we're using in these movies. Interstellar, for instance, which is a science fiction movie, and I very much on purpose actually stayed away from the electronics and used the church organ because it is a huge synthesizer. You know, so it was a perfect metaphor for electronic music. But I think, look, up there's the poster for Metropolis, which, you know, I think one of the things that is great about film is it doesn't confine you to verse, chorus, a pop song structure. And it gives you an enormous amount of freedom in that regard, that the structure, the visual structure suggests vast landscapes, for instance. That, I mean, you were talking about. Plus, the other thing was, when I started out, one of the things I hated was that we always had to listen the mix on a little speaker so it would translate to the radio. Anyone remember that? And I liked it big and loud, and cinema was big and loud. And the Mini Moog made a noise where you needed big speakers to really appreciate it. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to go into the cinema, and I think that there is a connection there. Flippant answer, but...
Well, listen, first of all, I want to thank everybody who came in, and you guys were so quiet and thoughtfully listening to what was going on here, so thank you.
I just would... Thank you. Yeah, I just would like to add something very quickly. I think there are two sides of electronic music, like rock, like jazz. It's the hedonist part, and also the more social, political part. And I would say that electronic music is also now being the music being reflecting our times. It's true for when you are doing a soundtrack, working with one composer or what. It's true when you are doing lyrics on a song, and the song itself. It's true also like Moby, and I would like to say a word about this. The fact that, for instance, at the moment we are sharing absolutely the same opinion about what's going on in your country. And I worked with somebody like Edward Snowden as a collaborator in this electronica project, and I think all this is very important. And I really didn't want to leave the room without just quickly mentioning this. I mean, we are not politicians, but through our music, it's very important to share convictions, to share opinions, and just to in an artistic, poetic way. And it's I think some of us here are trying to do. And I just wanted to. As I just said to Moby when we were entering to the room, I followed what he's done on his social media in a way of really involving himself to try to organize a resistance. My mother was a great figure in the French resistance, so I feel very close to this kind of attitude. Thank you.
One very, very last thing that goes full circle to that. It's one of the emancipating aspects of people not buying records is like, I'm such a loudmouth on social media. I'm like, what are people going to do? Not buy the records they weren't going to buy anyway?
Yes, that's a risk.
I want to thank everybody for bringing their creativity and their thoughts to the stage. To Hans, to Julia, to Victoria, Jean-Michel, of course, Gary and Moby, and thank you. Good luck, by the way. Thank you.